لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله
صحبه وسلم أجمعين. Now, like I said, we're going over the overview of this text. Inshallah, if Allah gives us tawfiq we can complete the entire text sometime in the future. It's okay. Oh, I don't think there are any more. Yeah. And so, these are the subcategories or the species of virtues for wisdom. But now he's going to go to courage and talk about what are the species of virtues that relate to courage. And there are 11 when it comes to courage. Now, and the first one he says is kibarun nafs, right? And here he doesn't mean, make great of your nafs, your lower self, but kibarun nafs means greatness of the soul. And what it means here is that treating your soul and not letting it do things that are not worthy and of what your soul should be involved in. So he says here, وَهُوَ إِسْتِحْقَارُ الْيَسَارِ وَالْفَقْرِ وَالْكِبَرِ وَالصِّغَارِ. So it's considering profit, loss. Here is significance and insignificance, right? All is unimportant. Like that's not what's leading you and motivating you in your acts. And this is what's considered greatness of the soul. In other words, your soul is too it's too valuable for you to let it get involved in these type of acts and let it be motivated by these type of acts. So this is all of courage. It's interesting how when we think of courage, we normally don't think of many of these things that he's going to talk about here. And same thing comes with temperance as well. The second he says is lofty aspirations, azim al-himma, right? And what he means here is that not paying heed to the happiness or misery of this world, right? And that takes courage, is what he's saying here. And it takes a lot. So having lofty aspirations, it requires courage. And then patience. Patience here, though, he's defining it a bit differently when in different contexts. In this context, he's saying patience entails the power to resist pains and extreme fear. Right, the power to resist pain and resisting extreme fear. And this is perhaps what we normally associate with courage. Right, someone's courageous. Right, when they are resisting pain that they're undergoing and resisting any fearful situation. But that's actually patience, which is a subspecies, though, which is a species of courage. And najda, intrepidity, right? Very interesting. And that is where lack of anxiety in the face of terror. And that's also something we associate with courage quite frequently. Now, and the fifth is al-hilam, right? And here is clemency. And clemency entails tama'nina inda sawrat al-ghadab. That when you are in a state of anger, right, and that anger is just taking control of you, so you have to ward off that force of anger that's telling you to act in a particular way. But some people just remain calm when they are experiencing that anger. Some people need to, and this is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that when you're experiencing anger, if you're standing, sit down. If you're sitting down, recline. And then to do wudu, that washes away the anger. Some people, they may be experiencing much anger, but they're very calm, right? And this is that calmness that when they're in that state of anger. And that's clemency, that's hilam. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he's, said in the Quran, وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا, right? And the slaves of the slaves of the All-Merciful, when they are traversing the earth, right? And when they hawnan, meaning in a very composed manner, right? This idea of clemency, this calmness. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing His slaves, right? And He says that when they are traversing the earth, they do so in a manner with hawn, and when a ignorant person comes and addresses them, qalu salama, right? They say peace. In other words, they're not, when an ignorant person says something to them, it doesn't provoke them. They're very calm in that, in how they respond. And interesting, the Prophet ﷺ said in the Hadith Sahih that laysa, he asks his Sahaba, what do they consider a strong person to be? And he says, laysa shadidu bisura, right? Nam bisara'ati, innama shadidu alladhi yamliku nafsahu inda al-ghadabi bihi, right? Inda al-ghadabi. He says the strong person is not someone who can wrestle someone to the ground, physically strong, but a strong person is really someone who can control himself or is in possession of himself. Yamliku nafsahu inda al-ghadab, when that person gets angry, right? That's much more difficult than someone who is physically strong, merely. The sixth is as-sukun, right? Tranquility, and that's calmness during quarrels and wars, right? That that's who they say it's ta'anni fil khusumati wal hurub. Sayyidina Ali has a statement that he says, "Man balagha fil khusumati athima." Whoever, when there's a disputation going on, whoever transgresses the bounds of it, balagha fil khusuma, transgresses the bounds of that disputation. Then that person is not being tranquil anymore. Then that person has ethima, has committed a sin or committed a wrong action. In other words, even when you do engage in debate, even when you do engage, and people do that at times, right? You see this when they may disagree with somebody, or there's a disagreement at work, or there's a disagreement in the family. Then how you undertake that disagreement and how you resolve that disagreement. Some people get extremely upset. Some people just start to cry. Some people start to raise their voice. Some people start to throw things. I'm sure those of us who worked in different environments have seen a lot. I know I've seen my share as a principal. Wow. But the one thing is that this idea of having tranquility of sukun, right, which comes from courage, though, right? It's not from iffa. It's not from temperance. It's really interesting. How these are categorized. Why does he see sukun as a species of courage instead of iffa, or wisdom, But so studying the al-Iji, one important thing of studying this text is to study why he puts one, he considers something as a species of one of the principal virtues and not the other, and this gives insight into what the relationship of the virtues are to each other, and also to human psychology, right? And because that's the basis of why he's categorizing them in the way he has. And because in our culture, we, just by growing up here, we have to kind of, we've already acquired certain associations between virtues and what. And so this is kind of, by studying this text, it's a nice way of kind of rethinking, right, how we consider the relationship between the various virtues and the vice. And we can look into, we're reading the text of someone who's grounding this in the Quran and the Sunnah, obviously. So we can kind of readjust how we think of things, and the relation and the virtues and how they relate to each other. Courage too, an interesting 7 is humility, right? So after sukun, he says a tawada. But what is tawada? He defines it as venerating the people of virtue and those below one in wealth and social status, right? Very beautiful. And, as Sayyidina Ali says, Hilyatul mu'min tawada. The ornament of the believer is humility, tawada. And the Prophet ﷺ said in hadith, beautiful hadith, مَا تَوَاضَعَ أَحَدٌ لِلَّهِ إِلَّا رَفَعَهُ اللَّهُ. That no one has ever humbled themselves for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, except that Allah has raised them in ranks. Right? So tawada, very important. And what is that, though, is to venerate, isti'adham, to venerate the people who possess virtue, and those who don't, and those who are lower than you in social status and wealth, right, to venerate them as well, right? And so it's not just, so you have to venerate two classes of individuals, people who possess the fada'il, and then people who are below you in wealth and below you in social status, to have an isti'adham for them. Very nice. That's what constitutes humility. Shahama, gallantness. and that is avid to do great works that result in good repute, right? And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, أُولَٰئِكَ يُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْخَيْرَاتِ وَهُمْ لَهَا سَابِقُونَ, right? That there are people who يُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْخَيْرَاتِ, who hurry and quicken to do good deeds. And so being lazy in doing good deeds is a vice, right? And kasal. And now, and then the ninth is al-ihtimal, right? Endurance, right? And this is something interesting. Imam Zayd was telling me, I think, 2 weeks ago. He said people want Islam, but with no virtue. They just want to be Muslims, and but a Muslim who possesses no virtue at all. I was like, what do you mean by that? And he's saying, I guess he's experiencing a lot of people are talking to him, and he's seeing a lot of things in the Muslim community worldwide, but in particular the United States he was referring to, and in the West. He's saying that people want to be Muslims, but they don't want to be patient. People want to be Muslims, but they don't want to do ihtimal. They don't want to, just be calm and and bear some of the burdens and difficulties in life. Life has to be easy. Why should I bear this? He goes, no. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls us to be patient. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls us yahtamil. We have to bear, and be patient with some of the harms that were being inflicted upon us, right? Because how are you going to grow? How are you going to grow? How are you going to acquire these virtues if you don't have any difficulties in your life? How are you going to go through, and how are you going to exercise patience? How are you going to exercise endurance, right? How are you going to bear these difficulties if you don't go through these difficulties? Like, no, I'm a Muslim and I don't want anything to do with these things. It's not Islam. It's Islam without virtue. Right? That's not the Islam we want, right? That's not the Islam that the Quran and the Sunnah call for, right? And what's interesting is, in the Hadith Sahih, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that the closest people of all to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are those who He afflicts with most tribulation. So in other words, what you're trying to say is, it just doesn't work in Islam, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's relationship with them is that if He loves you, He'll throw afflictions, and then see how you act, right? And to know, are you true in your claims, right? Are you true in your claims? Do you have sidq in your claim, of loving Allah? That's why, Imam Ghazali says that if someone asks, do you love Allah, just kind of be quiet in some ways, because if you say yes, you're making a claim and you better prove it. You have to have the evidence to back up you truly do love Allah. If you say no, you commit kufr, right? So it's like to say, so you got to be careful the way you ask that question. But that's the Islam people want nowadays. They want an Islam where there's, no Islam with no virtues, Islam with no patience. Husband and wife, they can't be patient with each other. Yeah, he's got a lot of bad qualities, but he's got a lot of good qualities. Be patient with him, Yeah, she's got a lot of bad qualities, but she's got a lot of other good qualities. Be patient. Have some ihtimal. Have some, no one's perfect. What do you think? You're going to divorce this person and marry somebody else who's perfect? Really? You're deluded to think that. Because 2 years down the road, you're going to realize, oh, this person's got worse qualities than the first husband I married. It's like, what's going on? You're not going to. Every human being, right, all of us, right, humans as we are, as our state is, we haven't actualized our purpose. We're on the path to actualizing our purpose, inshallah. And if that's the case, the place where you need to demonstrate your virtues most is, with husband and wife, with your children, with your parents, right? That's where you really need to demonstrate the virtues, right? And you have to have them, possess them, and, it's training. So, demonstrate the virtues at that time. I don't want to be patient. Why should I have to be patient? Why should I have to bear what she's saying? Why should I have to be bear? Okay, you want an Islam with no virtues? Look at what type of life you're going to have. It's going to be a horrible life, Yes, sir.
Is that one of the reasons that divorce is not recommended in Islam to teach patience?
No, I wouldn't say that. Because there are certain scenarios where, you guys just don't belong together, we just have to acknowledge that. But to say that, Allahu Alam, but the idea is that people may arrive at the conclusion that they need to divorce the person, or they may say that's the way out because they don't have patience with each other, and so it's like try every aspect to save that relationship before you reach the conclusion that we need to get a divorce. In other words, you should exhaust all possibilities prior to that. But you also have to keep the possibility in mind that there are certain situations that you just shouldn't bear. Someone's being physically abused and this and that. We're not talking about that. Don't be patient. Okay, this person only slapped me 3 times. I should be patient. Thank God he didn't slap me once, or whatever. It could have been 4 times he slapped me. No. That's not what we're talking about here. Someone's hurting you. Go to the authorities and say this person needs to stop, and whether you're a child, whether you're, husband and wife, whatever. But what we're talking about here is just qualities that people have, that, this person, doesn't put his plates back after he eats in the dishwasher. Be patient. Tell them, hey, could you put your plates back after you're done eating? Person doesn't pick up their clothes or something like that. Or they may have certain akhlaq, certain qualities, right, that they have to work on, right? That's what we're talking about. Any type of harm, la darar wa la dirar, right? Allah's Prophet said, you can't cause harm and you can't be in a situation where you're inflicting harm on yourself, right? That's haram to do that. But we're talking about being patient just with people's qualities, people's mizaj, their temperaments. Some people are, she laughs too much. Okay, khalas. He never laughs. Okay. Make a funnier joke next time or something, or something like be patient with people. Like, just don't say, oh, she never laughs, I want to find someone else. Okay, that's not right, Be patient, right, and things like this, or, I work with people. And sometimes that's who they are. You just have to accept people for who they are, right? And just say that they're going to work on it, right? And so it's just kind of acknowledging that, the human condition, that, while we are in the path of trying to perfect ourselves, we are going to be in an imperfect state until we reach that perfect state. So that state prior to reaching that, perfecting our human nature, prior to that, we're going to be in a state of imperfection. And we're going to have qualities that are good and qualities that are bad. So we just have to acknowledge that. That's the idea of being patient and all that. Oh yeah, someone started doing things like that. Someone's harming someone, and abusing them and all that. Now, call the authorities. Don't be patient. That's not the time to be patient. You're not acting wise in that sense, right? It's like, yeah. There was a question. Was it? Oh yeah. Go ahead.
I think it has a lot to do with the fact that people really want to seek comfort in this world to an unrealistic degree, and I think that's because they forget that this is a temporary abode, right? We're travelers in this world, and we have an actual final destination. So it's like a disconnect from their actual purpose, right?
I agree. Yeah.
And they're, I guess, taking these desires and what's the word? Not making them excessive, but also emphasizing them.
Yeah.
Right? Over their actual.
Yeah.
Over their actual purpose.
No, I agree. Yeah. That happens a lot, and I think it does relate to how they conceive of their life in this world, and it goes back to the conception of their purpose of this life. Yeah, SubhanAllah. Yeah, I agree. A good comment. Now, so endurance is tiring out of the body and performing good works. Protective care. This is really interesting. Al-Hamiyya. This is a very important quality that I think sometimes we Muslims get a bit apathetic about certain things, right? Protective care, and look what he says here. Is that it's وهي عفوا نعم نعم الحمية المحافظة على الحرم والدين من التهمة. Is protecting sacred objects and religion from false accusations. Like defending the Quran. That's very important, right? That's someone insults the Quran, someone insults our Prophet alayhi salam. We don't go. It doesn't mean that we say you can't criticize our religion. No, people have criticized. The Quran records criticisms, people criticizing our faith and bringing up issues, but it gives reply. But what it means here is that we should not be apathetic. when someone says something about the Quran or about the Prophet ﷺ, it shouldn't be as if we shouldn't just, like the fact that it doesn't impact us, and we should feel a bit hurt by that. Not hurt in the sense that, we're damaged or we take offense or anything. No, is that this is the Prophet of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like, you can't just speak about, him in any way you want. They are, limits to what we can and can't say. And so you have people now, I'm sure you probably heard of it, but this one lady, she's in public, she said things about Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. I don't even want to repeat, and just, saying horrible things about Sayyidina, a Muslim, right, saying this. It's like, if, is this where your philosophy of life leads you to even, if it's leading, it's in the Bible, Jesus is quoted as saying, is by their fruits you should know them. These are your fruits? They lead you to saying, cursing and insulting prophets? You have sour fruits. I don't want what you're, and that's a sign that the tree is bad. It's a sign the water you're drinking from that's, that's coming in your roots, there's something wrong there. If that's the fruits that it's producing, right? And you have people now who will say things that, they will look at the Prophet ﷺ in ways that, and these are Muslims, and and kind of imposing and projecting intentions to the Prophet ﷺ, in ways that you can't speak about. You have no proof what was in the Prophet ﷺ's heart. How can he, as if you have access to what was in the Prophet ﷺ's heart, and you're saying this is the real reason why he did this? Where? You have no proof for these things. You can't just say. So we as Muslims, we should feel a sense of, no, this is our Prophet. You can't just say things like this, right? You can't just say things. And we're not talking about having valid questions. Having valid questions is one thing, but just making claims without proof and then insisting on those claims, la. So in our Muslim, in our community, we should have a sense of, and this is where we should have this protective sense. Like, these are our religion, and, people speak about ulama in ways that are very derogatory. People speak about the sha'air of Allah, of our religion, major things of our deen, and they'll speak about it in a very negative way, and they'll mock, these things. This is not right? We should stand. We should have our hearts should, we should feel like, a sense of, no, we need to protect them. You can't just speak out like these things. And this is what he's talking about, hamiyah, so protective care, right? We should have a protective care about our faith, about our Muslims as well, and what goes on with Muslims. We should be clear. We shouldn't be just, indifferent to things that are happening to Muslims or happening to, in the Muslim community. We should not have a sense of indifference. We should care. We should have a relationship to the Muslim community and to the sha'air of our deen. And so protecting sacred objects and religion from false accusations, right? So writing to somebody to correct what they've said or to refute what they said, if someone's written a book or an article or, has some sinister type of, conclusions, we should, writing a refutation, that's a good act. You're defending your deen, you're defending the Prophet ﷺ, right? You're defending Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his book. And that is a praiseworthy act. But when you don't, when you don't have any care for that, that's a bad sign in your heart. It's like, well, do you have any of this hamiyah? Do you have any of this protective care, for religion, right? And for the signs of religion? So, yes, we should be concerned about that, It doesn't mean we get involved in every single debate and every single argument, no. But it means that, what someone says about the deen should concern you. You should be concerned about that. You should be concerned about having a correct understanding of the deen. And then he ends here with riqqa, right? Empathy. And to experience the pain which afflicts others. So the difference between empathy, right, is that you put yourself in the shoes of that individual. Right? You try to imagine yourself, so you actually try to experience the pain, where you actually feel the pain that that other person is going through. Sympathy is where you acknowledge that, that person's, you recognize they're going under pain, but you yourself may not, experience or feel sad or feel that pain, but you sympathize. You're like, you're going through some hard times. Can I help you? And this and that. Empathy is where you actually feel that pain too, along with that individual experiencing that pain. So it's interesting. All this comes under courage, right? So, so the idea of empathy, is a courageous act. It's a subspecies of. It's an example of courage. Now, and then iffa, the last one, is also 11. So he talks about al-haya, right? For temperance, there are 11. And haya, he says, is inhisadu nafs khawfa irtikab al-qaba'ih. So it's the recoiling of the soul. So like in your soul you feel a type of recoiling, right? A type of inqibad or inhisad due to the fear of committing foul deeds, right? So, if a person were to commit a foul deed, they feel this something in their soul, a type of recoiling, and that prevents them from committing that deed. That's called haya, right? Haya is kind of like when a person were to now when a person, let's say that they were supposed to have submitted certain documents to their supervisor, right, in their job. They're supposed to have submitted it by Friday 5 p.m. They didn't submit it by 5 p.m. But now they see their boss in the hallway, their supervisor in the hallway, right? You not wanting to, you're trying to avoid, meeting your supervisor because you didn't do certain things that you were asked to do. That feeling you get, that's haya, right? And so it's a haya, it's a feeling, it's an emotion that's produced. Haya is that recoiling of the soul that's produced due to your shortcomings. You acknowledging your shortcomings, and you feel modest, you feel shy or haya to meet that person. So, having haya from Allah, you are afraid to, you're feeling modest and shy to meet Allah because you haven't done what He's asked you to do, right? And you feel that sense of modesty and shyness, right? That's what we're talking about here when he's talking about modesty. Because haya is a very, and even in Greek, there's a word in Greek that captures it, this haya in Arabic very nicely. But in English, it's not. And when I was reading certain, translations of certain texts on how to translate this topic of modesty in English, and a lot of people the word eidos, right, aidos in Greek, it's exactly what haya is in Arabic, and Greek translators to English were saying, neither shame nor modesty nor other words capture what eidos is, and in Greek as well. It's the name of one of the Greek gods actually too, but when he was explaining what that word meant in Greek, I was like, that's exactly what it means in Arabic. So it's really hard so modesty or shyness does not capture what haya means, but that's what the definition, I hope, clarifies that. So it's that feeling you get due to shortcomings that you possess, and that recoiling of the soul of, like, for example, meeting, like if you were to go to your sheikh, you feel so much haya in front of your sheikh because he's asked you to do so many things, and you haven't done those things correctly. So, like, imagine if we were to go to the Prophet ﷺ, a person should have so much haya because we haven't fulfilled what the Prophet ﷺ asked us to do in the manner that he's asked us to do. That's haya, that type of recoiling. And so you can experience haya, you should have haya from Allah, you should have haya of the Prophet ﷺ, you should have haya of the believers and of your friends as well. There's haya, it's a very, very important quality, to the extent that the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith sahih, beautiful hadith, that he says, "Inna likulli dinin khuluq," that every religion has an emblematic character trait. "Inna likulli dinin khuluq, wa khuluqul Islam al-haya." Beautiful. And the emblematic character trait of Islam is haya, is this trait. Beautiful. It's a beautiful hadith, and it's hadith sahih, inshallah. So it's from Sayyidina Anas radiallahu anhu. Now, Fadl.
So are these qualities that you are going through, they are all malaka that can be obtained in the method that you have described?
Exactly. All of them are, yeah.
So sometimes, like for example, haya or sabr, which will come after, they are also name of maqamat in tasawwuf. Does it mean that they can, are we taking this about the same thing?
It depends on how it's defined. So I wouldn't assume necessarily that they're talking about identically the same thing, but the way they'll define it in tasawwuf will have some resemblance to this. There's definitely, be a relationship between the two. But and it depends. For some ulama, haya may mean certain things to certain ulama tasawwuf, and to other ulama, they'll have different definition, And may not be different entirely, but may emphasize certain points of haya. Yeah. So, but they'll definitely be related. Definitely be related on that. Because they're all, it's all the same religion, But they just may have different shades of understanding on that. Does that help, inshallah? Yeah. No.
So what's the difference between haya and feeling guilty?
His question was, what's the difference between haya and feeling guilty? Depends on what you mean by guilty, right? One scholar I studied with said that there's no such thing as guilt in our religion, like the way it's understood in Western Christianity, guilt, right? They use guilt to get people to do things all the time, and she made me feel so guilty, and that's why you did it, because they kind of, and so that's why people do things after they kind of make them feel guilty, and they do things out of that motivation. Yeah, I don't know what the word for guilt would be in Arabic. Nadam is remorse. That's regret. Yeah. And nadam toba, like feeling remorse or regret, that's the essence of toba. But guilt, that's the thing, I don't know. Allahu Alam. Naam, sir? Yeah, see, it all depends how you define guilt, right? So that's something that, we have to look into, like how guilt is defined. Yeah, but haya, I know there's reasons why I didn't, translate it as guilt, because, yeah. Yes?
I think there's also a temporal difference because haya is pre-act, so it prevents you from acting, versus guilt is a post-act, so it's the consequence of the act.
True. That's a very good point. Yeah, because guilt is you feel bad for doing something, right? And it's after the act. Haya, this is before, and this act, haya actually prevents you from the act itself. So, in other words, you're not doing the act, or there's a situation where perhaps you can, or people are pushing you, or something is pushing you to do the act. But haya min Allah, out of haya, that feeling that you get, it's like no. I don't want to do that, That's a good point. That's a very good point. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, that's why I knew there's a reason I didn't translate as guilt, Yeah. Forget these things. There's a question,
I remember reading a hadith, I believe it's a hadith Qudsi, where the Prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, spend, O son of Adam, and I'll spend on you.
No.
And my understanding is that the way he'll spend on us is through giving us like good character traits like this. Is that a correct understanding?
Not necessarily. Not that. It could be a correct. One of the ways that Allah spends on you. But here, the understanding is wealth. In other words, don't be afraid. Rizq is understood here, like in the actual, sustenance. Because there's rizq ma'nawi too. Like part of your rizq is your character traits, your friends, your as well. But here, I think rizq, spending, meaning that just spend, like your money, your wealth, and Allah, don't worry, Allah will take care of that. He will spend on you, and it may not, you given 10,000, you see 10,000 appear in your account. Not in that sense, out of nowhere, but it's more in this that okay, you spend in whatever you think you're not going to be able to provide, Allah will provide that for you and your family. That's the meaning of that. Yeah, Allahu A'lam. No. So this is very important, like the haya. So inna likulli dinin khuluq wa khuluq al-Islam al-haya. Right. This is the emblematic quality of our character trait of our religion is haya. Patience. Right. So in other words, patience as a subspecies of courage. Now patience as a species of iffa, temperance. Here is restraining the soul from following desires of the lower self. Right. So here is patience more in the sense how we understand it. Right. That is patience with. You show patience with, and it takes patience to say no to yourself. You have to bear it, right? And then sedatedness, ad-da'a, is stillness of the soul at the stirring up of lust. So when those desires get stirred up in you, right, just remaining calm and stillness, not acting in accordance with those desires, right, is the idea of stillness. Like it doesn't even. So the difference is in patience, you actually start to want to act in accordance with those desires. So you have to show patience here with your soul. When you're sedatedness, right, sada'a means that the desires get riled up, but you have no inclination, right, to even act upon them. So in other words, you don't have to show patience in this sense, right, because you don't even have the desire to act upon them. And nazaha, good calculation, and this is where the acquiring of wealth without any abasement or oppression, right, where you earn your wealth, but you earn it in a manner where you committed no dhulm, right, and you committed no, you didn't embarrass anybody, you didn't debase somebody, you didn't, step on anybody to get your wealth or anything. You've done it in a way which is you've calculated it well. And meaning, what does he mean by well calculated? Not in terms of profits and loss, but in terms of the ethics of acquiring your wealth, right? Where it didn't involve that, or with no oppression, and spending it, then you spend your wealth for praiseworthy causes. That's what's called an-nazaha. And then al-qana'a, which is contentment with one's loss, and that's restricting oneself. So when you have contentment with whatever suffices you, and you live within your means, right? Living with what suffices you. That's al-qana'a. And then waqar is statedness, and that's deliberation in the face of what one seeks out. Meaning where you want to seek certain things, you have an objective, right? You're seeking certain things, and then instead of just impetuously acting or to seek out what you want, you take time and you deliberate. That's waqar, all right? And the Prophet ﷺ says, al-ajalatu min ash-shaytan, right? Wa ta'anni min ar-Rahman. In the hadith in the Tirmidhi, that he says, haste is from shaitan. And what does that mean is you just, let's just go do it, and you don't think about it, right? So just being hasteful in, not good deeds you should be hasteful in, but here just, anything, should we go on this trip? Let's just go, and then, you don't think about it. So that's ajala, right? Being hasteful, and that's from shaitan. Whereas ta'anni, which is waqar, statedness and deliberation, right, in the face of what one wants to seek, that's from ar-Rahman, right? So showing that, let's think about this before we engage in this act, right? And let's think about the pros and cons and all of how we're going to actually achieve that. Now, and then the seventh is ar-Rifq, and very beautiful, ar-Rifq, which is benignity, right? And that's easily submitting to performing beautiful works in the context of temperance. In the context, because usually rifq means, it does have this idea of gentleness, right? And but here, gentleness and, meaning that when you're doing good works, it's not like someone has to, drag you out of bed, rip off your, bed, your blanket, and, and then, pour water over you to get you to pray and stuff like that, right? That means you don't have rifq here. The idea is that when it's time to do a good work, you're not fighting it. You easily submit that this is the time to do that good deed, right? You're not fighting it internally or externally as well. So a rifq. Now, and to the extent the Prophet ﷺ says, "Man yuhram al-rifq, yuhram al-khayr." Whoever is devoid of rifq, right, then they've been devoid of all good, right? So rifq is and in the hadith, another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ mentions that nothing accompanies rifq illa zanahu, right, except that it beautifies that act. So being gentle, right, it does nothing except to beautify that act. Aywa. And then husn as-samt, good disposition, and that's loving what perfects the soul, right? That's a sign that a person has good disposition when they love things, and those things that they love, it actually helps them and to perfect their own soul. And that's husn as-samt. Now, ajib. And then the ninth is al-wara', and that's scrupulousness, right? And that is mulazamatul a'mal al-jamila, that is adhering to good works. Naam. And good works meaning good works that are in accordance with the Sharia, good works that are in accordance with reason, and good works that are in accordance with muru'ah. Muru'ah is what's socially considered to be good as well. So the Sharia consider what's good, and good according to reason, and good according to social customs. Muru'ah, very important for us to keep that in mind. And then al-intidam, and that is huwa taqdirul amur wa tartibuha bihasb al-masalih. Very important, is the arranging and ordering of affairs in accordance with the procurement of goods, of masalih. And so this is an ifa. Why is this an ifa? Because you're expressing some type of refraining. In all of these, like what's the common thing in these virtues, right? You can see at the basis of these virtues, you're refraining from doing something. You're not just jumping, and that's shahwa, right? But here, you're just not jumping, you're actually pausing and you're reflecting before engaging on this act. So intidam, in order for you to arrange your affairs in a way that's in accordance with what's good, so you can acquire your goods and what you're seeking, you have to stop. You have to think, right? You have to refrain yourself from actually doing an act and thinking beforehand, right? So that's intidam. And then liberality is sakha, right? And that's what he's talking about. Sakha here is giving what is appropriate to who is deserving. So you have to know what to give, not only what to give, but who to give it to, and you have to make sure what you're giving is appropriate to that person. That's what's called a sakha in its true sense. And here there's some detail. So there's some subspecies of liberality, and so karam, which is generosity, but that's where you give with ease, and you actually take pleasure in giving. Right? So sometimes you'll give and you're like, I'm fighting my nafs, so I'm going to give, and you don't. But there's a state people reach where they give easily, but that's where they find pleasure in. They want to give. And if they don't give, and this is the Prophet ﷺ, he wouldn't sleep unless he gave everything, away that he had extra. In other words, when you have things and you don't give them to people, you actually feel perturbed about this and you feel some inner turbulence. But here, the pleasure is you actually experience happiness and pleasure when you give things to other people. Altruism, right, ithad, is preferring others while not fulfilling one's own needs. Right, that's a true type of, that type of sacrifice is very difficult, and this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised people in the Quran, in Surah Al-Hashr, where He says, وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِ خَصَاصَةٌ, that they prefer others to themselves despite it being them acquiring a loss. It was a loss to them to prefer others in certain things to them. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised this. This is ithad. And this is one of the most significant virtues that poses a challenge for Darwinism. Like Darwinism tries to, when you look at evolutionary theory and how they explain human behavior, when they see human beings performing altruistic acts, they're just perplexed. And why would they do that? Because it goes against, according to Darwinism, our good, our telos, and Darwinists believe we don't have a telos, but some of them are trying to say, no, we actually do, and that's survival. Survival is a human telos. And if that is the case, in the Darwinian framework, the human telos is survival, and it's not just a human telos, it's a telos for all animals, is survival. How do you make sense of altruism? How do you make sense of altruistic beliefs? Why would someone hurt their own survival for the sake and promote someone else's survival at the expense of their own? That doesn't make sense from a Darwinian point of view. Now, they know this is a big problem, so what they did is, they'll try to come up with arguments to show altruistic behavior can work in a Darwinian framework, but they're not really convincing arguments, to be honest. And then, then in the end, in order to explain it, even in Darwinian framework, they have to bring in some sort of understanding of human telos that's not just survival, right? It's beyond survival, in order to explain altruistic behavior in human beings. So, but this is an important point to keep in mind with al-ithad. And then benevolence is nubul, and this is joyful spending. And he's not meaning going out to the mall and buying whatever you want here. Rather, what he's meaning here is that when you do spend, you experience surur, you experience happiness, right? and this is in Surah Al-Insan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا. That the person is doing is ala al-hub. Because many people, they will give food or and all that, but they kind of want it for themselves, or there's a type of, they don't want to give that to somebody, or they'll give it begrudgingly. But here, you reach a state where you actually love and you feel happiness when you do so. So it's that. And then al-muwasa. Al-muwasa is where, is beneficence. And this is where you're spending on your friends. Ma musharak, spending on one's friends. Well, muwasa, he says, وَهِيَ أَنْ يَكُونَ مَعَ مُشَارَكَةِ الْأَصْدِقَاءِ. Now, that you're spending, I translate spending on one's friends, but it could also be spending with one's friends, so you collectively will agree to spend on for a certain cause. That's muwasa. Now, and the fifth is samaha. Samaha is munificence, and that's voluntary spending. Badlu ma la yajibu tafaddulan. But here you're spending on one's friends, but not friends, but you're spending that which is not required. Because sometimes you need to spend because someone has needs, very legitimate needs. But other times you may spend on someone and they don't have a need to. You're going beyond what's required, right, of spending. And so this is munificence. This is known as the samaha. And then al-musamaha is tarku ma la yajibu tanazzuhan. Right, it's kind of the opposite of this in some ways. Is where it's remissiveness, where you're overlooking what is required to be spent. Tarku ma la yajibu tanazzuhan. Naam. Yeah, what he means here by this is that, if you spend money or you give wealth to somebody, you give them a certain sum of money, what's required is that they pay you that money back. Here, you kind of overlook that. You say, okay, don't worry about the money that you owe me. Don't worry about that. That's showing remissiveness, right, in this case. That's what he means here by musamaha. Tarku ma la yajibu tanazzuhan. It's overlooking what is required to be spent. So in other words, this person is required to pay you money back for what you've given to them, and that's the tanazzuhan. Now, we have 10 minutes, but let's see here. So justice, it's very interesting, justice. He says justice is a term which combines all virtues, right? And this is that idea of whole justice, not partial justice, right? So it's when he says, the virtue of justice comes about when you possess all of the virtues that he just has preceded, that had preceded us. And it also has species, so. And it's really interesting. The first one is friendship, right? That's actually a virtue from justice coming about, not from iffah, not from wisdom, not from courage, but friendship. And so how does he define friendship? He goes, mahabbatun sadiqatun. It's pure love between two individuals having no other objective. Your own, bihaythu la yashubuha gharad. There's no ulterior motive for why you love that individual. It's just, you just love that individual, and it's pure love, having no other objective. And he prefers the friend over himself in all that is good. وَيُؤْثِرُهُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ فِي الْخَيْرَاتِ. That's friendship, right? And that's a pretty difficult level of friendship, right? But in other words, and that's where you think about your relationships with different people, and you can discern who is a friend in this sense, and who is acquaintance, or who are people you just. But here he's defining it as as someone who loves somebody for no other reason, right, other than loving them for the qualities they possess, and then they prefer that person. And this is a hadith, a very beautiful hadith, of the seven who will earn Allah's shade on the Day of Judgment. And then he says, "Ayn al-mutahabbuna bi-jalali," right? Where are those who loved each other for my sake, for my, اليوم أظلهم في ظلي يوم لا ظل إلا ظلي. He goes, today I will grant them my shade in which there is no other shade except for my shade. So those who love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala love each other for no other purpose than Allah. That's a very high degree of friendship, right? And this, to show that how special this and rare and difficult this is, look at the reward. The reward is high because it's a difficult act to really love somebody and have a friend in this sense. And then, but it comes under justice. It's very interesting, right? It's very interesting why he puts it as a species of justice. Yes, sir?
What is meant by the word khayrat in this definition, and how does it fit with the command in the Quran to compete in good actions between?
No, khayrat here it means wealth.
Okay.
Because the word, like in the Quran, in taraka khayran, right? Khayr in the Quran, and many times it means mal, wealth. وَإِنَّهُ لِحُبِّ الْخَيْرِ لَشَدِيدٌ. Khayr means wealth, right? So in other words, you prefer this friend in matters of wealth and everything and all that. It's a pretty high level of friendship. Now, and then, al-ulfa, right? Having concord between friends is the agreeing of opinions and mutually fulfilling the needs of livelihood. Right? اتفاق الآراء في المعاونة على تدبير المعاش. So in other words here is that when there's agreement, right? And when you're talking about, well, how should we fulfill our needs and living together and this and that between husband and wife or family, brother and sister, parents and all that, there's ulfa, there's agreement in the opinions. And fidelity, adhering to sharing with others and fulfilling the rights of those who associate with one. That's al-wafa, right? It's showing is fidelity, very important. And a tawaddud, amiability, is seeking the love of one's friends by doing that which brings about love. So you do those acts that bring about love, and then you're trying to bring about, so you do acts that result in people loving each other, and so having that tawaddud, right? And so people who always do that, you see that they'll just do acts, very, very beautiful acts to people without asking them or without them asking those acts to be done, and it just does nothing but engender love for that person, right? That's tawaddud. And then remuneration, now the fifth one, right? Now, al-mukafa'a, and that's, he says, is to return a good deed in equal measure or more, right? مقابلة الإحسان بمثله أو زيادة. And then fair cooperation is observing fairness in transactions. Now, and then good repayment, right? Very beautiful. So husnul, it's just, off one. Husnul sharika. Yeah, that's the fifth one. Husnul qada. So when you owe somebody money, right, recompensing without regret or keeping score. Sorry, good repayment, recompensing without regret, and keeping score of favors. So without doing those two. In other words, that when you like when you give money to people, right, it's not that you should always remind them, oh, remember I gave you money that time, or remember, I helped you move from your house to this. Like, you always remind them, and they're kind of like, okay, I wish I never asked you, in the first place. And so this is what the idea here is, that when you don't keep score of favors, and the Quran really has spoken really against this, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تُبْطِلُوا صَدَقَاتِكُمْ بِالْمَنِّ وَالْأَذَى. Don't invalidate your charity, acts of charity, by menna. Menna is reminding people, keeping score, right? And adha, like harming people, like, and then the person's like, well, you just keep your charity. You're causing me so much harm by, grievance by what you've given. So, you always remind them, always reminding people, I did this for you. Remember I did that for you. Remember I did this for you, and that invalidates the deeds that you've done for them. Yes, sir.
How do you balance that with, say, for example, so you did all these favors for someone, and then there comes a time where you need a favor, and they kind of like put you down ungratefully.
Yeah.
How do you balance that out?
No, if you ask them and they say they don't repay the favor, I say, okay, that's fine. That's their loss, right? I mean, they're not able to recognize, Or, if you have a good opinion, which perhaps we should, right? Maybe they're just not able to say no. And they're out of hayat, they're like, oh my God, he's done so much for me and he's asking me this one thing, but I really can't do it. How do I? maybe they have a reason for saying no, or they just don't want to confess certain things. But if they, in the end of the day, if they're not repaying that favor, okay, that's between them and Allah then, they should feel some sort of, shukr, gratitude. And that should encourage them to, if they can't help you, they should say, look, I can't help you, but I'll find somebody who can help you. I have to fulfill your need that you're asking for them. But you shouldn't walk away and say, God, I helped that guy so much, he can't even do this. That's kind of, that's not a good, thought to have.
Sorry, just to I guess flesh it out more. What if there's a sense of disrespect on their side, where they actively have malice towards you when they say no? Is that something you point out to them?
If with the niyyah of nasiha, that could be, yeah. And you can say, look, I really don't want you to do anything for me, but consider, just be careful when if it was somebody else, you did this too. Like, don't do this to somebody else. But make sure you're doing it out of nasiha, out of advice. Don't do it to get back at them. Because that's just that's not a virtuous act then. But if you make your niyyah that you're doing out of nasiha to somebody, and you're saying, okay, just don't worry about me, but don't do this to anybody else, because the other person may not be as nice as I am, or something, or may not act the same way. Don't want to claim you're nice either. It's very difficult. The I is the problem, the ego. That's why some of the mashayikh actually, when I know one of my sheikhs, he told me that his sheikh told him he couldn't use the word I for 16 years to cure his ego. He couldn't say I. So he couldn't say, I wrote this, I did, because then it's a very big door for. So part of his tarbiyah, his training, discipline was to not say the word I at all. It's difficult. So yeah, don't, when you do things like this, be careful, of how you, but make sure you're niyyah. Make dua to Allah before you do it. Say, Allah, I'm just doing it for the sake, maybe make me do it for sincere reasons. And inshallah, that's true, and then Allah will make that happen for you, inshallah. Yeah, that's difficult. We're a big test for each other, human beings. Maintaining kinship bonds, mashallah, very, very important. Silatul Rahim. And that is where you allow relatives to share in good works, right? To share in good works, that's very important. And people who are close to you, right? It's and your relatives, is very important to make sure that you maintain good relationships with them. Now, and then, sympathy. So this is, here's sympathy, that's a shafaqah. And he defines as focusing one's concern to removing what is disliked from people. So people, they're doing things that's disliked, and you want to remove that from people. That's a shafaqah, having sympathy for them. Rectification, right? And that's al-islah, arbitrating between parties in order to avoid quarrels. That's where justice. So you see this type of, justice coming in. That's kind of the forms that we understand of it. Then reliance on God, right? At-tawakkul, and that is where avoiding matters not under human capacity, right? So in other words, you can't do this, then don't, and it's not in your capacity to do this act, then don't do that, right? It's that if you don't have the capacity to do this act, then don't do it, and then rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instead. Now then submission to God, right? Taslim, and that is submitting to the command of God Most High and not objecting to what one does not agree with, right? Al-inqiyad li amri Allah wa tarkul i'tirad fima la yula'im. So something happens that you don't agree with, you don't start accusing God of things, right? This is called submitting to God in this sense, submitting to the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, if it's against the Sharia, then you have to act to remove it. But the fact that it's from Allah, you accept that dimension of it. Contentment, al-rida, the joy of the soul in what is granted to one, and what misses one without aversion. Now, and then worshipful devotion, right? Al-ibadah. Right, ibadah is part, and that's the veneration of God, the veneration of His friends, and the obedience to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-ibadah is ta'zim Allah wa ahlihi, naam, wa imtithali awamirihi. Aywa. So, alhamdulillah, at least we finished the first article. There's, hopefully there'll be another time to do the rest. But he talks about how to acquire virtue. So this is kind of more practical in the sense that, when you, how can you obtain virtue if you don't possess the virtue? And how do you obtain the virtue, or how do you keep the virtue once you obtain it? And the character trait, how do you, and so, he'll mention things like, once you possess a virtue, you have to work to preserve it by keeping the company of those nobles who possess the virtue, avoiding the company of those who don't possess the virtue. You should, he should be careful regarding giving himself to sensual pleasures, jokes, and argumentation. He should discipline his soul by undertaking doctrinal, ilmiya, and discursive exercises. Right? You should recall it, and so there's a lot of practical things that he gives in order to make sure that. One of the interesting things he should choose, 2.3, he should choose his truest friends who will make him aware of his faults, right, and seek out statements of his enemies, thereby coming to know his own faults. So listen to what your enemies say about you is probably true, right? And then, and because they're not gonna, if they're probably gonna, because while your enemies are looking for your faults, right? So they're probably going to see things that you might not see. And he should also study the faults of people in order to avoid them. And if he observes any lackness in himself, he should bring his soul under control by undertaking difficult, strenuous spiritual exercises. And so he goes into a lot of that in the next sections. Alhamdulillah, I know it was just a 5-hour excursion, to this. Hopefully it will encourage us, and we'll get opportunities in the future to finish this entire text, inshallah. It's definitely worth it, I feel. Allah give us tawfiq, and Allah grant us husn al-khuluq, inshallah, on this, inshallah.